in that it was weak through the flesh. God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. On account of sin, he condemned sin in the flesh. Amen? So there's two things when it comes down to deliverance. There's two things that God says are conditional. Okay? Two things. There's conditions of sin that will hinder our deliverance. And there's conditions of the flesh that will hinder our deliverance. You guys see that? Sin and the flesh. Listen, there's two things that Christ has already done in regards to sin and flesh. As we have just read, if we walk according to the Spirit, the law of the Spirit through Christ makes us free from the sin and flesh. Verse number 3 says this. Actually, it's 4. For the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. You guys see that? So, I see the word requirement, and I see the word condition, and I see the same thing. Conditions and requirements are the same. You just read that passage. It says in there that through Christ he has made the requirements that have to be made in order for us to be free. The requirements have already been met. The shedding of blood for the remission of sin has already been met. Amen? But there is a requirement that we have to acknowledge. Even today, there's a requirement that we have to acknowledge that allows us to be free. Yes, Christ makes us free according to grace and according to the Spirit. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're walking in that freedom. Freedom comes through the Spirit. Freedom is a spiritual thing. It's not a physical thing. It's a spiritual thing. Listen, there's a lot of people out there that are saying, listen, you don't have to listen. You can be free. You can do whatever you want to do. And I know somebody right now who is running and running and running and running, and he's trying to find a place where there is no law. He's looking for a place that he can live where there is no law. He's a law unto himself. He wants to do what he wants to do, and he wants to do it his way and not anyone else's. And he's running away from everything and looking for a place where there is no law. Can you go anywhere and hide yourself from the law? I'm just asking. I've seen some pretty desolate places now. In my little journey, we had a chance to go to Texas, and boy, I'm telling you, you can get lost in Texas. You can get lost in New Mexico. You can actually get lost in Colorado. Man, there's nowhere. Man, there's hundreds of miles of open area. And I'm sure you can find yourself a little tent or a little teepee if you like, and set yourself in a place to where you don't have to worry about the sheriff, you don't have to worry about county commissioner, you don't have to worry about nobody but yourself. You can isolate yourself if you want to. Get yourself away from every society and thinking of a word here. But you can't get away from the law. The reason is because you already know what's wrong. You can only lie to yourself for so long. Because the wages of sin is what? Death. I know people who will die in the wilderness. Is that what happened to Israel? They were set free, weren't they? They came out of 400 years, and yet they died in the wilderness. You know why? They wouldn't accept the law. They wouldn't accept the law. They wouldn't believe. They wouldn't trust. They wanted to do it their way. And they all died. All but 2 people died. Isn't that crazy? 2 million people, at least, came out of Egypt. Only 2 came into the promised land. You know what God's design is for you? You know what God's design is for you? You know what God's design is for you? He wants to take you out of darkness and He wants to bring you into life. Amen. He wants to take you out of darkness and He wants to bring you into life. But the only way through it is a wilderness. You know what you do in that wilderness time? You die. Doesn't it say that you have to die to sin? Isn't that why we get baptized? Doesn't it say that we have to die to this flesh? We'll get to the scriptures here in a minute. If we don't die, then we're not going to obtain the promise. Hello? If we don't die, you're not going to obtain the promise. Period. Jesus even says, what is born of the flesh is flesh. What is born of the Spirit is spirit. That's why you have to be born again. Amen? If you're running in the flesh, guess what? Your flesh is eating you up. Am I right? Have you guys ever noticed vultures?
Yeah.
How many of you guys like vultures? You like it? What are vultures for? They eat rotten flesh. You know what vultures represent in the Bible? Demons. Wherever you see dead flesh, that's where demons are. Tormenting demons, aren't they? Hello? They torment you. You know why? Because you're still in the flesh. And sin reigns in your body. So these vultures have their heyday with you. And they will consume you. Now the neat thing about vultures is if you get rid of the flesh, they have to go someplace else. Right? Listen, I died. I am dead to sin. I hate sin. I hate it. That's why you can't tell me that smoking pot is okay. You can't tell me that drinking a beer is okay. You can't tell me that smoking... You can't tell me. Because I hate it. I see what these things do to my brothers and my sisters. I know what they've done to my family. And they continue to destroy us. Am I right? I hate it. I hate what sin is doing. I hate it. It's not of God. You know what these things condition us to do? They condition us to die. If all these things were as good as people say, we wouldn't be dying left and right. of people die left and right. And they lose their jobs. They lose their families. They lose their life. That ain't God's plan. So would you say there are conditions here today? Would you say there's conditions today? Help me out now. What is sin? What kind of... Well, there's all kinds of sin that we can talk about. I'd like to talk about 5 of these things today, and maybe we'll get through them all. Okay? If you guys can spare me 10 minutes, who wants to give me 10 minutes? There's 10, 20, 30, 40. I got 50 minutes. There's 5 things that we're going to talk about here today. 5 sins that we need to get rid of if we want to be delivered. How many of us want to be delivered? Okay? 5 things that we have to get rid of. Mark them down. These are the 5 things that are killing us. Yeah, there's probably 500 others